It was one of my mother's sisters, and I'm told that when my mother sent a picture of me to my grandmother, she held it to her breast, and she died, and soon after that, her sister died. So I have a sister who's named after my grandmother, and then I'm Frieda after my mother's sister.
And what was your last name when, the family names?
The family name is Nankin, which doesn't sound like a Jewish name. In fact, I have a cousin who was interested in the history of the family and the name. And she made up this story that we probably came from China and the silk trade because most of the family was in the garment business. But I don't think it's true.
So what do you know about your family's origins in Europe?
Okay. I know that my parents' family lived in a village. My father's family lived in a village north of Chelm, and it was a glass factory owned by a man by the name of Siegel, who I understand what they told me at one time was that he was probably one of the richest Jews in Poland, and he knew all the people in politics, but he was a very good man. And one story my uncle told me was that when he came to town, there was a parade. And he had a home there because he came there quite often. Town meaning Ruda Huta, where the glass factory was. And there were flowers everywhere and celebration because they respected him as a great person. And he was a good man. He was kind and apparently good to his workers. So that was Ruda Huta. And then 7 kilometers further was a place called Savine, my mother used to call it. All of this is in the Lublin, I don't know if you call it a province, but it's a large area. And so my mother's mother, no, my mother's father was a lumber dealer. I should finish with my father.
Sure.
My father's father was a tailor. And they lived in a large parcel, which we saw when I was there, but very poor. There were 5 sisters and 3 brothers. 3 brothers all became tailors, and they all followed. My father came to Milwaukee, where I grew up, first, and then he brought his 2 brothers, and they were all tailors. And the sisters had a different story, and I don't know their name. I do know their names. I can't remember them, but they were much older, and they were married. They had their own families, and only one was lost in the Holocaust. The other ones came away from there about 1920s, and one moved to Israel, so she was okay. One moved to Canada, and I don't know what happened to the rest of them. All right, now my mother's family. So my grandfather, her father, was a lumber dealer, and they lived in Sabine, and her mother had 14 children. 5 of them did not survive. They died before they were toddlers. And 2 of them went to Canada, Saskatchewan. And that's where my mother immigrated to. And I don't know what happened to the rest of them. So there were 3 that survived, and the other 6, I don't know. I do have a letter written in 1939 that I'm trying to get transcribed. It's in Yiddish, in script. And I read script, but this guy has some flourishes I can't decipher. And I want to know what's in that because I'm sure that it's relevant to what happened to the rest of the family. That's it.
And about when did your parents come, or your grandparents and then parents come to North America?
The first one to come was a half-sister of my father's. She, incidentally, was a sister to my grandfather, my mother's father. I've never been able to figure out that relationship. She was called Gittel. She was so smart, so able. So she and Max Sheminsky came to Milwaukee. He was a shoemaker, and he ended up, by the time he died, he had this huge family shoe store, a men's department, a ladies' department, a children's department, and an X-ray machine, which at that time, people didn't know how dangerous it was. And parents used to take us to Uncle Manis to get shoes, and the best part was putting our feet into that X-ray machine to see our feet, how it fit in the shoe. And later, of course, we learned it was not a good idea. So she and Gittel, she was so smart. She decided that now she has an opportunity to bring her family over. So the first one she brought over was my father in 1921. And before 1923, there was no problem getting into the United States. And then there were the laws. And so that made it more difficult for my mother. But anyhow, so she brought my father over. And of course, he learned tailoring from his father. So he found a job easily in one of the new factories that was making ready-to-wear clothing. And he loved my mother, even back in Poland. But my mother wasn't interested. He had 2 brothers, and she was more interested in one of the other brothers until that one that she was interested got married. And then she was the youngest girl in her family. Am I wandering a lot?
No, this is great.
So the youngest girl in her family. So and her sister, my Aunt Clara, who was in Canada, we went to visit her, and she told me, "Oh, your mother was so adored by her father. He called her his lalke, which means doll, and he always loved hugging her and playing with her." And so when my father got to Milwaukee, he decided, well, she should get married. He wanted to bring both brothers over. The one brother was married, and he already had a son, So Aunt Gittel said, that's going to be too difficult because that's 3 people. And this was already after the laws, the immigration laws were established. So she said, we'll bring Jack. So he came over, and then he wanted to bring his youngest brother, who was Yessel. And Yessel was, just as my mother was her father's favorite, Yessel was his father's favorite because he was determined that Yessel was going to become a Rav, a rabbi. He was the youngest son, and they wanted to have a Rav in the family. So by the time my father had a chance to bring Uncle Yessel over, many years later, the immigration laws prevented it, and Yessel went to Cuba because he had a wife and 2 sons by then. And then just before the war, 1940, my father was able to bring him to Milwaukee from Cuba. Let's see. What else?
So do you want to tell me about Milwaukee? What was it like when you were growing up there?
Well, my father worked for a few months, or before my mother came, he had worked and saved a little money. And so when he felt he was ready to establish a little tailor shop of his own, he negotiated with my Aunt Clara in Canada to bring my mother to Milwaukee, and he would marry her, and he would be happy, and she would be happy. Everybody would be happy. But my mother had gone, when my father went to the U.S., my mother had gone to Canada because Clara had had a child, about a year old, and she was expecting her second child, and she told the immigration people she needed someone to help her with the children. So my mother went to Canada, and her brother was living in Canada, Moshe. He was living there with his wife and family, and Clara was very happy to have her sister there and get a little help. And then my father, on the other hand, started writing to her and trying to make plans to bring my mother to Milwaukee because he wanted to marry her. So, excuse me. So Clara started buying things for my mother. She said, I'm going to send you on a trip, and you're going to see some of your old acquaintances. They're living in Milwaukee now, and you'll have a good time. And my mother didn't want to leave because there were some boys there that she was interested in. She was so cute. So she said, okay, I'll go for just a short time. But she was so naive. When her a sister put on the train, she only had a one-way ticket. So she got to Milwaukee, and she loved it there. People, housing had been arranged for her, and my father had made all these promises to her. So she stayed. And then the place she was staying in was only available for 6 weeks. And so, now how am I going to get back? She didn't have any money. And she said, don't worry, we'll get married. So she was surprised, but they married and had a wonderful long marriage and 3 kids.
And where are you in the kids?
I'm the oldest, yeah. And I have a sister 2 years younger, and I have a brother who's 11 years younger.
And can you say what year you were born?
Sure. I was born on May 8th, 1924. So next year, 2024? You figure it out.
Wow, bis
Yeah.
120.
Pardon me?
Bis 120.
Oh, nein.
No?
Nein. Nein. No. Aber, no. Es ist schon genug.
So can you describe a bit about Milwaukee in the 20s and 30s when you were growing up?
Sure. My father did as he said he would do. He bought this little house. Actually, it had been condemned. It was ready to be torn down. It was in pretty bad condition, but that's all he could afford. The reason he wanted it had glass across the front. It was the living room. You walked in, and you walked into the living room, and he said, that's a perfect store. And then we lived behind the store. And he started very well. It wasn't a Jewish neighborhood. In fact, it was quite a ways from the Jewish neighborhood, mostly German. And there were a pair of twins my age just living a few doors down. I'm getting ahead of myself. So anyhow, he bought that building, and things were good. That was in I don't remember. I don't remember. But then there was a small cottage in back. There was an open area next to the house, and then there was an open cottage at back that was vacant. And so he did well in the business and bought another place. And I think he sold the first one, and then things got better and better, and then he bought this huge building on the corner, which later, when he left, turned into an A&P. You know, an A&P supermarket? That gives you an idea how big that building was. So we lived in that small cottage in the back, and then my sister was born, and the place got too small. And on top of that, my father, in 1933, decided it was time to bring his parents over. He'd gotten his brothers out, and time to bring his parents. So they moved in with us. And that's where the Yiddish came in, because they didn't know a word of Yiddish. And neither of my parents ever went to school. Not to Hebrew school, not to English school. My father learned because he learned Yiddish and Hebrew. You know, he learned Yiddishkeit because his father, this is back in Ruda Huta, used to have a scholar come in because there were 3 sons, and he would teach them. I don't know how often it was, maybe once a week or I don't know. So he learned to read and write Yiddish, and of course the Hebrew Torah, well, the text. And why did I go back?
Can you tell me about your grandparents? What were they like?
Oh, my grandfather was very, very sweet. He had a little white beard, and we couldn't interact that much because he didn't know a word of English. But my father managed to set him up in a little business after he had become used to Milwaukee, and he lived there for a little while. But then a few years later, he had a burst appendix. I think it was appendix or gallbladder or something, and he didn't survive. He got an infection. My grandmother, on the other hand, was very difficult. I think she might have had a stroke. We didn't communicate well, but they came when we were still in that little cottage, and there were only 2 bedrooms and two little girls. And my father didn't want her to be by herself, so they set up a cot in the dining room where my sister could sleep, and I had to sleep in the other bedroom with my grandmother. And she wasn't well. She used to pinch me, and she also was incontinent. So that was a problem for me. And then at that point, my mother couldn't handle it. She couldn't handle this woman who wasn't well and 2 little girls, and she was helping my father in the shop. And so she said, I have to see my sister. And she took the 2 of us, and we went to Canada, back to her sister. She said, I need a little vacation. At that time, she had a daughter living just a half a block further on. And the daughter said, no, I can't take my mother because I've got 3 children here, and there's no room. And then somebody else his brother, who at that time had his family there, he wouldn't take her either because his wife wasn't well. So my grandmother ended up in the Jewish, I forgot what it's called, Jewish nursing home. And but I never got close to her. My grandfather was kind and sweet, but she wasn't well, and so I never got close to her.
So you visited Saskatoon? Is that really still where they were at the time?
Her sister and brother were still there, yeah. It was wonderful. By that time, Aunt Clara had 3 sons and a daughter. So we had people to play with, and I still remember when we used to walk out a little distance, they had a lot of blueberries. And we used to come back with these little pails of blueberries, and she would bake pies. I still remember that.
Now, how was your family observant?
Very. Yeah, Orthodox, real Orthodox.
So what shul did you go to?
Well, in Milwaukee, there were at least a dozen shuls. And they were all within, I would say, within a mile. They were shtibelach, and it was for where you had come from. There was for the Lithuanians, there were for people who came from Warsaw, people that came from, other big cities. They had established their own shuls. And I have to tell you this, on the high holidays, the kids were never allowed in shul. But my father always made special outfits for my sister and myself. And we would get our girlfriends together, and we would go from one shul to the next shul to greet our relatives. And then once we came in, we went upstairs to the balcony of the shul, and our aunts would want to introduce us to their friends, and so there was a little commotion, and the rabbi would say, "Shashtul," we're interrupting the services. But the services were not like they are now, everyone was doing their own praying. So there was plenty of noise down there, but he just didn't like the commotion that was going on upstairs. So it was mostly the girls who did this. The boys were outside throwing pennies against the wall, playing games. And I just remember those years so well. And then, of course, Yom Kippur, we couldn't eat. So we didn't have to drive because we were about a mile from that area, so we could walk. And my mother always said, put a little package in the car if you get hungry. So that was okay.
Did you have a favorite yontif as a kid?
Oh, yeah. We celebrated all the holidays. My father, well, when he retired, he went to shul regularly, Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. My mother, not so much. But my mother, I had a lot of brothers, and the way my father's father did, brought in a scholar. Her father did the same thing for her brothers. And she told me that she never went to school, but she always knew where to hide. So when those teachers came in, she learned along with her fathers. And she could write Yiddish. And she said she had her own little prayer book. It was for women. And I never rode in a car on Shabbos. It's forbidden. I couldn't do homework on Shabbos. And my brother is still Orthodox, and he's got an ultra-Orthodox son and grandchildren, but he has 3 other children. I don't know what they are. No, they're like me. They're observant, but in our own way.
So as a kid, was there a yontif that was particularly special or fun?
Most I remember about holidays is my grandfather giving the kids silver dollars on Hanukkah. But Hanukkah was not like we celebrate it now. We lit candles every night. I don't remember putting the candelabra in front of the window. Remember I told you about that little cottage that we lived in? My father ended up owning that, and he rented it to a German family, not knowing that they were Nazis. And when Hitler took power, that guy would come out on the front of the house with his radio, and when Hitler spoke, he would turn the volume up as high as he could, and it was scary. Yeah.
What was it like for you and your family being in a German neighborhood during that time?
No problem. Everyone respected my father. They were nice people. I had my best friends were twins who lived just a few doors down. Elmer and Elsie, I forgot her name, Emke. And we used to go in the backyard. Never went in the house, but we used to say, "Oh, girlie, come here, you come out and play." And we called him Boy Boy. They hadn't, but they went to a Lutheran school. We didn't go to, but they were the same age. And there were, Immersion was on the other side. We played in the alley. And I said, when I see my great-grandkids and their toys, it's almost like a toy store. And I tell him, I never had toys. One time I had a doll, and I didn't really play with her, but I liked her because when you lay her down, her eyes close, and then you sit her up, and her eyes are open. But we just played in the alley with tin cans, and we played school, and there were a few Jewish families further down the street, and they had little kids, and then we'd come play together.
How did you feel about being Jewish when you were growing up?
I never thought about it, except when we started to go, my sister and I started to go to Hebrew school. Then it became an issue. Because St. Boniface, which was a Catholic school, was right next to our school, and we would go to school to Talmud Torah after school, and we would have to walk back past by St. Boniface, and we always got teased. But nobody actually bothered us. So my sister and I went to Hebrew school. And then my brother had a different experience because we later lived in a different part of town where Jewish people lived. Yeah, my father said, when I turned 16, my father said, we've got to get out of here. So he bought a house in the Jewish neighborhood and made sure that my friends would be all Jewish. But up until then, I didn't. I had Jewish friends, but it never was an issue.
Were you aware of what was going on in Europe? I mean,
Oh, by then, yeah, I was an adult.
Yeah, no, I mean earlier, like in the 30s, and you mentioned the radio for this Nazi guy, but...
No, that was more in the later 30s. Yeah, that was like 38, 39, when things got really bad. Maybe 35, 36, but then I was only, 8, 9 years old. I didn't know politics. Although my father subscribed to the Milwaukee Journal, he read it regularly, even though he had never gone to school. I don't know how he learned, but he learned how to read.
Was there any Yiddish in the Yiddish newspapers or Yiddish theater, radio?
I don't know about Yiddish theater, but with all the shuls, yeah, we had a Jewish center. In fact, I worked at the Jewish center when I was going to college. Yeah, there was a Jewish area where lots of things were, but not theater. I don't remember going to any performances. But I told you, my grandfather was Aaron Nankin. He had all these brothers. He had a sister, Zivia. Ends with a Z, T's, S, Z, something like that. So we had a cousins club, A to Z cousins club. And we had lots of cousins, loads of cousins. So we usually celebrated holidays like Hanukkah, Seders, whatever, with cousins. Yeah. Or one time, my father he had this big tailor shop. He set up long tables, and we had a Seder there. I don't know how many people there were there. I was a child, so I didn't pay much attention to it. In fact, no, I wasn't even at that Seder. I was upstairs with the measles. But I remember their pictures of that.
So if I had asked you at a young age, maybe 12 or something, what do you think about Yiddish? What was your attitude towards Yiddish when you were growing up?
It was just there. I didn't think about it. I used the library a lot, which was quite a ways from us, but this half-sister of my father's, who lived in Milwaukee, lived near the library. And I remember roller skating up there and getting books from the library, not Yiddish books, but I did belong to Hashomer Hatzair. And at that point, I was learning how to get ready to move to Palestine and help establish a country, a nation there. And my father didn't like that. He said, they're all socialists. He didn't want me associating with socialists. But it was fine. And as I said, I did have friends who were Jewish, but I wasn't aware of anything else.
People talk sometimes about the tension between Yiddish and Hebrew. Did you feel that growing up?
No, that happened in Israel, not here. Nothing about that. People in the United States didn't speak Hebrew. The tension was Israel wanted to be a nation, and they wanted to have their language, and Hebrew was the language. In fact, in the 1970s, I went to Israel a number of times, four times, and each time, in order to get around, I spoke Yiddish. And my cousins there spoke Yiddish. So I think it was just when the nation was being established that the founders thought, if we're going to be a nation, we should have our language. And it's no problem now. Now I think they value being able to speak. I did. I know when I visited, of course I was an adult then. I love Yiddish. I mean, there's so many things that you can't translate unless you use Yiddish, especially when I talk to my friends. And I put on that little Ellie, my friend Henele, and she calls me Frieda. I love Yiddish as a language, yeah.
So once you moved away from your parents' home and started your own life, what decisions did you make in terms of what kind of Jewish home to have for your family and your children?
That's a very interesting question. I got married in 1947, and my husband was a veteran. He had been in Europe, and I met him when he was after. I met him on my 21st birthday, May 8th, whatever that year was. He was in uniform in downtown Milwaukee, and they had closed down the downtown, and they asked everybody to come and celebrate. So I was going to college, and Catholic college, Marquette, which was downtown. And the next door neighbor where we lived, they were Jewish, and the daughter came over, and I was home from school, and she said, let's go down and celebrate. Wisconsin Avenue is blocked off to traffic. We'll have a lot of fun. So about a half a dozen of us got together, went downtown. Nobody drove. We used a streetcar. And walking along, seeing everybody kissing and singing and happy, and who should come along? This gorgeous man. And Francine said, oh, there's Irv. And we had to stop and talk to him. He was in his uniform. And he introduced us, and we were talking. He was on his way to meet his sister, who was having dinner with Francine's parents at the Schrader Hotel, which was the big hotel downtown. And that's where we were headed. And he said that's where he was going because her parents were having dinner with his sister, and he was staying with his sister. He actually lived in Ludington, Michigan before the war, but none of it, well, that's a different story. That's his life. So he said, suddenly, I don't know what happened. He grabbed me. And what is he doing? I started running. And he chased me. What? And so I thought, this is ridiculous. Why am I running? So he caught me, and he kissed me. And then the rest of it, we had a good time, the whole gang. And then I never saw him again because he was being redeployed to the West Coast to go to Japan because the war had not ended in Japan. And then that war ended, and he was, what do you call it? He was out of service, and he came back to live with his sister until he could settle someplace. And he had enlisted when he was 17 years old. He was determined to go over there. So he really was not prepared for any profession or any kind of work. So he lived with his sister trying to decide what he was going to do. And he decided that he was going to go to college, GI Bill. So I was working at the Jewish Center, and he had come there to work out. And I was at the front desk, and that's how we met. He remembered me, I remembered him, and I went to the back where all the girls were. There were no boys around during World War II. And I said, ladies, that guy is off limits. And we ended up getting married a couple of years later. I don't remember why you asked me that question. I
love that. Thank you. I was asking about when you made your home together, what did you decide about Jewishness and what?
Oh, yeah, that's right. We had a beautiful wedding. I left home. We left home right after the wedding, go on our honeymoon, and Irv had arranged housing for veterans at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. It was 50 miles from campus, and it was in barracks that had been occupied by people who were working in a munitions factory across the road. And they had converted it. These barracks had, I think, 24 couples in them. No bathrooms, no private baths. There were 2 rooms. There was a kitchen, living room combined, which was about half the size of this room, and a bedroom. And there were 24 couples, and everyone had a baby. There was a men's bathroom, there was a ladies' bathroom, there was a men's shower, a ladies' shower, there was 2 different rooms for washing diapers. There were no throwaway diapers. And one couple, one man who had married a French woman always put up a sign in the women's bathroom, occupied, because there weren't private showers. There were just showers that came off, like 9 people could shower at a time. So that's where we lived, and we had, like I said, we had 2 rooms, but I said, no, that we're going to have a kosher house. And he agreed, because his mother also was very religious, and that's what we were used to. And then family came to visit us. We were there for a couple of years. Family came to visit us. His sister came with her husband, and they didn't stay with us. There was no room. I don't remember. They came to visit, and then we had breakfast, and she said, "Where's the bacon?" And I said, we're kosher. And she said, "Yeah, but you don't have any bacon." No. So she thought we couldn't afford it. So she went and bought it, and then made bacon for her husband, and that's where I lost my kosher home. Because after that, but it really wasn't a problem. There was no kosher butcher out there 50 miles from the campus, but it was fine. So I'm not kosher, but I'm definitely Jewish. And I love my synagogue. I love going there.
Maybe we can fast forward to Amherst, and can you say a little bit about your synagogue?
Well, it's Reconstructionist. So the rabbi is vegetarian, is his wife, and the people who go to services regularly, or as a matter of fact, we have services every day, and he can't do them twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. So these last 3 years, it's people who belong to the synagogue who've been conducting services. And we have lots of Friday nights, there are meals always, but it's always vegetarian, except if there's a special occasion, there's fish, something like salmon. But otherwise, it's not a problem. And our Yiddish Legenkreis meets there, and we meet at 12:30, so we have lunch, and we observe it. As a matter of fact, no non-kosher stuff and no nuts, because people are sensitive to nuts.
So how did you get involved in Yiddish here in Amherst?
Oh, Aaron, was getting books together. I wasn't there at the very beginning. I was there in 1980, where the town of Amherst was letting him use the East Street School. And I went there to volunteer. I don't remember for what, but what's her name? Sharon Kleinbaum. You know Sharon? She was working there at that time, and I became very close to her. So she took me to New York as a Zammler, and I really loved it. I loved being there, and I used to say, "Wow, I finally found my place." We had moved to Amherst in 65, yeah. And I was working on a graduate degree, and my kids were still young, so I didn't do much except be a housewife. I just did volunteer. I did a lot with the League of Women Voters, and then
and then you got connected to Sharon and the center?
No, I got connected to the center. I don't remember. I think they asked for volunteers. They were using the warehouse in Holyoke. And, it was a lot of work. And I can't remember what was the thing that brought me there, whether they were looking for people or what. But then the people who were there were just terrific people. I loved them. I used to say, I really found my reason for living. I'm at home. And I did all kinds of crazy things. I knew enough Yiddish. But what happened, really, was a group of them were talking. I think it was a Zabeler who had come in, and Aaron and somebody else, maybe it was Sharon. They were talking. And I understood they were talking in Yiddish. And I understood them. And it never occurred to me that I knew Yiddish. And because I heard so much of it in my home. My parents were talking to each other in Yiddish a lot. And now I regret it, but I used to say, talk English. But they talked, when they used to come to school, they couldn't express themselves well. My father could, but my mother couldn't, but because he learned English with his customers. And she was really a very good mother. She was busy with us. We finally had 3 children. I had a brother 11 years younger than me. I have a brother 11 years younger than me. But, I loved being at the center. And then I got them to contribute to buy bookshelves. Well, you know the way Aaron raises money. And it really was great.
What appealed to you about the project, about the center back then?
About which project?
About the Yiddish Book Center and Aaron's work and...
The fact that it drew on something I didn't know I had. I didn't even think about Yiddish until that point. We belonged to the synagogues wherever we lived. We lived in Illinois for a long time after he got out of school, but never any contact with Yiddish. And then when I have this skill I didn't know I had, so and I finished my degree and I had time, so I went in, and then when they asked me if I would coordinate the elder hostel, and I went to Boston and learned how to do it, and then I met these wonderful people who came to the elder hostel. I showed you that article. They told us after the first year, you don't do elder hostel with us. You do your own, because they had too many applications.
Can you explain? Some people might not know what elder hostel is. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, that was a way for senior citizens, people who were retired, to be able to go for a week someplace else, have a vacation, and participate with other seniors and study something that they didn't know anything about, or something that they were very involved with and shared with other people. They were classes. What's taken its place is now learning. We have elder hostel for people living in Amherst or in Amherst area, but it's called Learning in Retirement. And people volunteer to teach classes, and you meet with other people your age, and you learn new things. And Elder Hostel was doing it away from home, because they provided, when you signed up for it, they provided housing and meals. And we had some wonderful experiences with that, traveling through the U.S.
And when it was at the Yiddish Book Center and you were running it, what was the program?
I didn't have anything to do with the program. It was Aaron and Sharon and Nancy Glick, who was very active. I didn't do any teaching, but they brought in people that I became very close with, like Hannah Klieger and Rachmiel Peltz, and I loved it.
Well, I want to switch gears now to hear about your trip to Poland, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, when did that idea start to be talked about?
It wasn't mine.
Yeah.
I just the only thing that I know about it was that my father used to, in the spring or during the summer, when fruit came in, he always used to say, "Oh, the orchards, the fruit where we lived, the aroma was so beautiful, and the fruit was so sweet." That's all I knew. And
so whose idea was it?
oh, it was my brother. My brother decided that we don't know anything about our parents' lives. I mean, only what they told us. And of course, the Jews were mostly killed from Poland. And we got to find out what it's like. We got to see where they came from. So he organized it, and he decided. Oh, and then we consulted with other people. His wife at that time was a travel agent, and she figured out where we could stay, and she found people who would, Polish people, who were translators, who would take us to where we wanted to go and tell us about what happened there and why it was an important place. And so he talked. My sister made a sign on, and then I had a cousin who lived in Israel, and he escaped the Nazis when they came to Chelm. They lived in Chelm, and they had some kind of a warning that the Nazis were coming near, and that was 6 miles from the Bug River. And he was the oldest, and my aunt said, his parents said, "You got to get out of here." He was, I think he was 18 or 19. And so he escaped, and his story you could write an encyclopedia of it. But and he was living in Israel, and my brother had met him, and he had come to this country at one point. I didn't know him. I never lived near my family. Once Irv got his doctorate, we moved from different universities. And my brother said, "Shlomo will know where to go, and he'll tell us what it was like living in Chelm and how it had changed and so on." So he and his wife joined us. There were 5 of us, and he also spoke up about the itinerary, and it was wonderful. I mean, what we saw was horrible, but the whole trip was very memorable. You could see a whole volume of pictures, and that's only part of it.
So what was it? Did you go to the towns where your parents had come from?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, we went to Warsaw. And we were at a hotel where across the street they had soldiers marching. It was similar to what you would find at Arlington, commemorating the people that had lost in other wars or in World War II, World War One, and we explored there a little bit. And then we went to Lublin, but that's the area that we were most interested in. And we visited all these. I told you we visited Auschwitz. You really don't know what it was until you're there. And unfortunately, it's become a kind of Disneyland because they bring school children there, and the children are too young to understand the horror that was taking place there. But it's still, most of it is standing, and there's Birkenau with the ovens, and they give you the history, and the worst one was Sobibor for us, because Sobibor was in Lublin province, not far from where my parents had grown up. And there's nothing standing there. There's a building where there's staff to tell you that Sobibor was there, and there are pictures and so on, but all the buildings are gone, and you want to know what it's like, you walk down a path. It's unpaved, and at the end of that path is this huge construction containing ashes and fragments of bones. Excuse me. And there are windows that magnify what's in there. And so we said Kaddish for our missing relatives, but it was just heartbreaking. And then we walked back, and where the buildings had been, where all that suffering had gone on, the crematorium and so on, there were a forest of small trees, young trees, I should say. And we started to walk back to the van, and we heard a whistle of a train. And it just sent chills up and down the back. And that was Sobibor.
Were you able to find any trace of the glass factory or other?
Yeah, I've got pictures. Yeah, Mr. Siegel's house is just, it's a wreck. Nobody lives in it, but it was huge. And, well, I have to tell you, 15 years later, our children went and did the same trip. And they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Yeah, my brother has 4 children. My sister has 4, and we have 3. And some of their spouses went along, and they all wanted to see what we had seen.
What were the, other than the horrible feelings that you mentioned, what were some of the feelings that you had being there, being in these places that your family had been?
Well, we went to Vladova, which is a little bit north. I'm not good in directions. And there's a Jewish office there. And we went in, and they had bulletin board with memorials on it. And they also, some artists had made copies of tombstones, and they were displayed. And I found the names of my cousins there. My cousins, Schuster's, and that was the name, Schuster and Schneiderman. I saw pictures of people I didn't know. And the cemetery, Well, I have to tell you one thing about Helm when we got there. It was almost dark, and we were booked into a hotel that was near the cemetery, so we wouldn't have to walk far the next day to go look at it. My cousin Shlomo had been there a few years before that, and he and his landsmen in Israel, the ones, people who knew, had gotten together, 22 of them got together with a pool of money and tried to resurrect the cemetery. It had been totally wiped out, and they erected this huge, they got a huge stone, and on there was a tablet saying what was in that cemetery. And first of all, it's surrounded by iron gates with spikes at the top. So since it was getting dark, we just walked over to it to see what we were going to see the next day. And there was a sign at the gate. It was padlocked, and it was in English and Polish, and I think it was Yiddish. I'm not sure. Maybe it was Hebrew. 3 languages. There was one sign on each side of the gate. And we looked through in between the bars, and we saw this huge monument. And then we saw some gravestones. We couldn't identify them from where we were standing. The next morning, the guide came to take us there. All those signs were, there was graffiti. It was all red and yellow, and there was something KPL, I don't know what that stood for. The signs were really with paint. Somebody had seen us looking through that gate. And then we took us inside, and that huge monument, my cousin and his friends had erected just a few years earlier, had a big swastika on it. The monuments, some of the tablets that had been mounted on there had been removed, or they were detached, and they just were. They weren't real tombstones. They were just something that each family had ordered to commemorate their own family, and the plaques on them were about their families, and the whole thing. And Shlomo had to see that. He was so excited that we were going to go visit that, so he could show us what they had done. And so I said to the guide, "So, what's going to be done here?" Yeah, I dismissed it. I guess it happens often, because as we visited other Jewish cemeteries, there were signs. In fact, there was one that said Jude Raus. So this is in 1997? Yeah, 1997. It's still there. And in Helm, it was so really bad because nobody looked up. We walked through the town because Shlomo wanted to show us where his yeshiva was. He went to a yeshiva. It was on an upper floor, and the main floor. I mean, it was a 4-story building, but in the main floor there was a bank, and at the very top was it was inscribed yeshiva and the dates, and nothing Jewish there. And in fact, walking through Helm, nobody looked us in the eye. And we said, "Do you think they know we're strangers?" And maybe the guide gave us away, I don't know, but it was so eerie. There's nothing there.
What was the impact of that trip, since then?
Well, I've been involved in Yiddishkeit for a long time now. I was doing Jewish genealogy, and then the books. Well, the book center came first, but now I do this Havara, this Yiddish Legacies, and our group is reading Yiddish. For this year, we're doing Yiddish poets, and every time we meet somebody, we read the biography, and then we read the poems, and we're learning something about the poetry, and the book contains writing by Elie Wiesel and some of the notables that are not poets, but we read a lot of Shalom Aleichem. Our group really was into Shalom Aleichem, and so we read Yiddish books, and it's fun.
So what motivates you to do this Legacies and make time for Yiddish in your life now?
It's where I'm comfortable. It's a part of me. I hope it can continue, but there's so much unhappiness. That's the worst part of it. And when you hear the poetry, it's always sad, and a lot of the writing is sad. And I don't enjoy the new books that come out in English where people are telling about life, Jewish life. It's not real, but I really, to me, it's just in my soul. I don't throw it into my speech all the time, but I love it when I read it. I just read a couple of books that had references to it. Do you know of Hetty Cotton Pogrebin? She just wrote a book called Shanda, which means shame, and she uses a lot of Yiddish words in there to refer to certain things. You get the message if you hear it in Yiddish better than in the translation. Oh, I just enjoy it.
What do you think is the future for Yiddish?
Do you mind if I don't even think about it?
No.
I don't know. I think when we were in Warsaw, we went to the cemetery there. And the cemetery is pretty dilapidated, not because of vandalism, but because of they're buried like 3-4 deep, one on top of the other. But then there's a special area there. There was an orphanage, a Jewish orphanage in Warsaw. And I don't think the director was Jewish, but he tried to save all those Jewish kids. And there's a commemoration there. And I think of, I don't think, it makes me feel so sad that that's all gone. Those people are gone. I don't know future. I don't think there's that much going on here, is there? Well, I had something I wanted to get translated. It's only a letter written in 1939, and I don't think there's anybody here who can do it. And 1939 was a pretty horrible year. So I'm anxious to get it done, but I can read some of it, but you have to be a real Yiddishist to understand the flourishes.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add to all that you've shared with us today? Any stories are coming to mind?
Oh, lots of stories.
Yeah.
No, I think I've said more than I intended to say.
Well, we always like to close our interviews with an eitzah. So do you have any advice for, you have some great-grandchildren of your own, or for future generations?
Well, I don't have any advice. I'm just very sad. My husband was he supported me in all this. He didn't know any Yiddish, but his parents were also immigrants, and he had 3 brothers and a sister. And it saddens me to say that I don't think any of them are Jewish anymore. Any of the children, they've married out of the faith, and these different things keep you busy. And unless you're affiliated with a synagogue, I don't know what's going to happen. My brother really pushed us to do this because he's Orthodox, and he doesn't like the way the Orthodox behave in Israel, and he wants there to be a Jewish life. But I don't know.
Well, a großen Dank. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
I should have used more Yiddish when I spoke.
Yeah, that's okay. Do you have any favorite Yiddish songs or phrases you want to share with us before we end?
The only thing that I do, really, I don't know that it's strictly Jewish, but whenever I say something that I think I think is important to say, I go, poo, poo, poo. You never know when the devil is, or the evil eye is there. I don't use Yiddish much in conversation, but I love it. I love the sound of it.
Me too. Well, thank you again, and thanks from the Yiddish Book Center too for.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't have more Yiddish to impart.
Oh, that's fine.